On taking office, I will also sign an executive order directing the immediate termination of every single unnecessary rule that is impeding housing construction and driving up the costs of housing. Regulations costing 40% of the cost, and it takes you years to get it done. We're going to end all of that. I have been a builder my entire life. I understand the problem, and I will fix it. I know how to fix it. Nobody else is going to figure it out.
I'm Antwann Michael, and this is The Breakdown. Let's get into it. All right, we have developing news coming out of Washington, D.C. We are now getting a more clear picture of what Trump's housing policies will look like and how that will impact the everyday person in the United States. So even at this moment, as the nation is navigating what is taking place with the defense secretary and others using the Signal app to discuss seemingly confidential information, there are very important moves that are being made over at the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which is directed by Bill Pulte. Of course, he is appointed by Donald Trump. And over the past 24 hours or so, he has released a number of orders that impact those who are looking to own their first homes and or have leases under the FHFA agency. So let's take a look at some of those orders. Well, let's take a look at the 6 orders that he has released so that we understand what is happening. So there is an order rescinding the directive on multifamily lease policies. There's another order rescinding unfair deceptive acts or practice compliances. Another order terminating the repair all strategy for Fannie Mae. Another order terminating the special credit purpose programs. Another waiving the equitable housing finance planning requirements, as well as another order rescinding climate risk management. So let's take each one of these in turn so that we understand how that will come to impact us and what this means for housing, because you will recall that Trump did say on the campaign trail that he is interested in looking at federal lands, knocking down those trees and building on that land. So how will what Bill Pulte is doing map onto those efforts? So the first one, the order rescinding the directive on multifamily lease policies, removes the requirement that borrowers meet minimum standards for rental payment flexibility, as well as standards in lease notices. It also removes the additional tenant protections put in place by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And the reason why Bill Pulte has elected to remove these protections for borrowers and those who are leasing is, he says, quote, many states and local governments have existing laws and policies related to lease notices and grace periods for late fees. So if you live in a municipality that does not necessarily favor you as someone who is leasing, or you live in an area that doesn't even cover these particular areas at all, you are no longer protected. He has issued, again, an order that rescinds those protections, effectively saying that this is not a Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's area of concern, and that if you want to get things done, you need to get those things done at the local level, that they will no longer protect consumers as it relates to those areas. So the next order, which rescinds the unfair deceptive acts or practices compliances that both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had in place. What is taking place here is that both of these institutions implemented their own rules over and above that which already existed to give attention and focus to unfair deceptive acts and practices and how it may show up in their housing processes, particularly as it relates to lending, because Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac often assist those who are underrepresented in home ownership. So overwhelmingly people of color, where there are barriers to access. And so Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had additional policies to make sure that those persons were not subject to unfair deceptive acts and practices. However, what Bill Pulte has now done is he has now pulled those protections back again here, and he is arguing that Dodd-Frank covers this area and that the agencies have no need to have further rules in place because they already have their rules that they abide by that deals with lending soundness and operational risk. But those additional steps to make sure that those families would not be taken advantage of with unfair deceptive acts and practices have now been removed. So the internal check and balance is no longer there. So obviously that is more in favor of the lender and or the landlord. Next up is the order terminating the repair all strategy for Fannie Mae as it relates to their REO or real estate owned properties. And what this impacts is that Fannie Mae, their approach was that they would repair everything as it relates to their real estate owned properties. That order and requirement is now removed. And Bill Pulte is saying that to repair all properties is, quote, operationally complex and has resulted in elongated timelines and the need to pay additional vendor fees for increased oversight of the construction processes. And what this does now is this moves Fannie Mae to a neutral approach to yield a greater return on their properties. So requiring that everything be in operating order, that things be checked out before folks move in, right? They're saying that, well, Bill Pulte is saying that that is no longer going to be a thing. So you would want to make sure, obviously, that you have your own inspector go in and look at things, because that repair all strategy that Fannie Mae has previously embraced will no longer be the case by way of this order from Bill Pulte that terminates that particular approach. Next up is the order terminating special credit purpose programs. This one is important. And what this has to deal with is the underwriting flexibility as well as financial support. What does that mean? Down payment assistance programs and closing cost assistance as well for both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are now terminated. This one is a big one. Bill Pulte has eliminated this. So Trump campaigned on, making sure that everyone is able to access the American dream. And here, down payment assistance as well as closing cost assistance has now been terminated. This limits home accessibility in the United States, even as the cost of owning a home goes up. In addition to Bill Pulte terminating the special credit programs over at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, particularly those programs that has to deal with down payment assistance as well as help with closing costs, Bill Pulte has also exercised his authority as a director of the FHFA to waive the equitable housing finance planning requirements. Now, what are these planning requirements? These planning requirements are programs that were put in place by both Fannie and Freddie to make sure that those who belong to populations that have been historically discriminated against in housing have equitable access to loans as well as favorable terms within those loans, so that those who belong to those populations have a chance at owning a home. By Bill Pulte waiving these planning requirements, what this does is this rescinds the equitable housing financing means for Fannie and Freddie, in that they no longer have to have plans in place to ensure equitable financing for those groups. In addition to this, Fannie and Freddie, by Bill Pulte waiving these particular planning requirements, they no longer have to notify and or otherwise engage with the public concerning the development of housing and or fair lending. What does this open the door for? This opens the door for redlining as well as restrictive deed covenants to take place all over again. We have to pay attention to what is happening here, because we see the United States being re-articulated in a very particular and specific way. The last order that Bill Pulte rolled out over at the FHFA is an order rescinding the climate risk management. And what this is for this impacts Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the Common Securitization Solutions, where they were required to have plans on the books, both plans and policies that would control for operational risk as well as natural disaster risk where their homes were built at. And Bill Pulte has rescinded that. This collides with what has been taking place with FEMA in terms of funding levels. And again, the implications here are clear. So if there is no longer going to be a natural disaster policy in place for FHFA properties, and then there is funding issues with FEMA, what then for persons who occupy those homes? This has far-reaching implications that we must think about. What is very, very clear here is that the neoliberal state is taking over anew. Not that it's ever went anywhere, but it's taking over anew. What do I mean by neoliberal in this particular instance? What I'm particularly referring to is deregulation. Deregulation that benefits corporations, that benefits those persons who are elite, because regulations are primarily in place to protect consumers, whether it be through the lending process or whether it be through the end result in that you have to have warranties, policies in place and different things of that sort. We see what is taking place here. Also, dealing with austerity budgets in the government. We have to be aware of that as well and what those budget cuts means for the general public. But then who actually receives those budgets that have been cut? That's been demonstrated through this most recent continuing resolution bill where the FAA was provided with $4 billion, and who has access to the FAA is Elon Musk because he wants to put Starlink in there. So by the FAA getting those $4 billion that were taken from other programs, now it gets to go over to Elon and Starlink. So here we see austerity budget cuts and the contraction of the government benefiting the elite. And what's also taking place via the rearticulation of the neoliberal state here is that we see public institutions and public services are now becoming privatized, and that is benefiting a particular class of people. What is also important to understand about Bill Pulte as it relates to this particular subject matter is that he belongs to the Pulte group. That is his family. They have to deal with housing construction as well as real estate development. They are one of the largest companies in the United States that does this. And by him having his plans directly on housing policies, there's a conflict of interest here because of who this ultimately comes to benefit. Keep your eye on this space. Keep your eye on this space. We do need to be able to pay attention to multiple things at one time because what is happening over at the FHFA has real-time impact for everyone. This is The Breakdown. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.